The screech of tires ripped through the quiet street, followed by a bone-chilling scream. Ava froze mid-step, her heart pounding. She turned to see an elderly man standing dazed at the crosswalk, directly in the path of a car that had just skidded to a halt. Without thinking, she sprinted forward, grabbed his arm, and yanked him to safety. The man stumbled into her arms, trembling. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. Eva's breath caught as their eyes locked. His face, worn by time, sparked something deep and unsettling within her. "I know you," she muttered. He blinked, confusion giving way to recognition. "Anna?" he asked, his voice shaking. "No, I'm Ava," she said, stunned. But something in his gaze pierced her. Sirens wailed in the distance. People were gathering, but the world around her blurred. The man clutched her hand, then let go and walked away slowly, disappearing into the crowd. Ava stood rooted, unable to breathe. That voice, that look, it wasn't possible. She hadn't heard anyone call her sister's name in 20 years. And she hadn't seen her brother since the night they were taken from their home. Ava couldn't sleep that night. Her thoughts spun like a carousel, each memory flashing too fast to catch, but one feeling clung to her: recognition. She sat by her window, staring at the silent city below. "It can't be," she whispered. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. She hadn't heard her sister's name spoken in decades, not since the night they were taken. Her brother had shouted for help as the foster officers separated them. She was only 6. She remembered his hand slipping from hers. The man she helped today, his voice had that same frantic edge, that same pain. Her stomach twisted. Could it really be him? But how? Why now? She reached for an old photo album from under her bed. It was weathered, filled with photos of a life that barely felt like hers anymore. On the last page was a newspaper clipping. "Missing siblings, search ends." She had forgotten about that. Or tried to. But maybe fate hadn't. Maybe fate was just getting started. She traced the edges of the old clipping with trembling fingers. Her brother's face stared back at her, frozen in time. Age 8, defiant, holding her hand protectively. "Michael," she whispered. Her voice cracked. She hadn't said his name aloud in years. She turned the page. There, faded but intact, was a drawing she'd made as a child, a crude sketch of her family. Mom, Dad, Ava, Michael. She ran her fingers over their smiling stick-figure faces. Tears slipped down her cheeks. The man she met today had Michael's eyes. That guarded kindness. That familiar scar above his left eyebrow. It couldn't be a coincidence. She stood and grabbed her coat. She needed to know more. She needed answers. She would retrace her steps from today, starting at that crosswalk. If he lived nearby, someone must have seen him. If not, she would make them remember. The next morning, Ava stood at the same crosswalk. The sky was gray again, low-hanging clouds pressing down. Traffic passed with its usual rhythm. But nothing felt usual anymore. She scanned every face, hoping to see him again. But there was no sign of him. She approached a nearby fruit vendor who had a cart beside the intersection. "Did you see that man yesterday?" she asked. The vendor frowned. "Lots of people pass through, ma'am." She showed him the clipping. His eyes narrowed. "He comes by some mornings," he said slowly. "Buys bananas, doesn't talk much." Ava's pulse quickened. "Do you know where he lives?" The man shook his head. "Sorry." She scribbled her number on a receipt and handed it over. "If you see him again, please call me." The vendor nodded. As Ava walked away, her mind raced. He was real. He was here. And she was getting closer. Back home, Ava sat in front of her laptop, the screen flickering with old public records. Adoption lists. Foster transfers. Court documents. Page after page, she hunted through unfamiliar names, searching for any sign of Michael. She didn't know what she was hoping for. A clue? A lead. A miracle. One document made her pause. A transfer file from 1996 listing a boy named Michael Whitman. Her last name at birth. Transferred to a temporary care home, just one district over. No way, she breathed. Could it really be that simple? That close? The file was incomplete, but the name matched, and the age was right. She leaned back, exhaling sharply. The man she helped was real. The memories weren't lies. Tomorrow, she would visit that care home. If it still existed, it might hold the truth she'd buried for decades. The care home sat in a forgotten pocket of the city, its bricks dulled by rain and time. Ava stood before the gate, heart pounding like a war drum. A woman in her 50s answered the door, eyes wary yet kind. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ava hesitated. "I'm looking for records from 1996. A boy named Michael Whitman might have lived here." The woman's eyes flickered with recognition, then retreated into caution. "That's a long time ago." Ava nodded. "I know, but it's important." She was led to a dusty office filled with filing cabinets and sagging folders. The director handed her a thin file. "This is all we have left." Ava opened it. A name. A medical note. A date of transfer. But no forwarding address. "Where did he go?" Ava asked. "We weren't told," the director replied. Many of the older files were destroyed during the fire in 2004. Ava's fingers trembled on the page. The trail was going cold again, but her resolve burned hotter. Someone knew something, and she wouldn't stop until she found them. Back in her apartment, Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, boxes of documents spread like puzzle pieces. Each folder held fragments of her past, social worker reports, court papers, scribbled notes in faded ink. She lit a candle, the flame steady despite her shaking hands. She whispered, "Talk to me, Michael. Where were you?" Her phone buzzed. "Lena." Ava answered, her voice distant. "I found a file, but it's thin. No address." Lena hesitated. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong place." Ava frowned. "What do you mean?" But Lena deflected. "Nothing. Just, maybe talk to the older foster families. Some still live in that area." Ava sighed. Right. But suspicion took root. Lena had always been supportive, but also guarded. Still, Ava clung to hope. Somewhere among these papers and ashes was the truth. She just had to be brave enough to dig deep, even if it broke her. The next day, Ava visited a retired foster couple who once took in children from that care home. Their house smelled of old wood and tea. Mrs. Hart, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, welcomed her inside. "Michael?" "Oh yes." "Quiet boy, stayed only a short time." Ava leaned forward. "Do you remember where he went after?" Mrs. Hart pursed her lips. "He ran away, night after a visit from some man claiming to be his father." Ava's blood ran cold. "Did anyone report it?" Mr. Hart, silent until now, said, "The man had papers, said he had rights. We thought it was legal." Ava's voice shook. "What was his name?" Mrs. Hart hesitated, then handed her a worn folder. Inside was a copy of an ID card, Nathan Kessler. Ava stared at the name. It meant nothing, and everything. She thanked them, then stepped outside, her hands trembling around the name like it was a key. Ava researched Nathan Kessler late into the night. His name triggered government database entries, court appeals, political campaign finance records, sealed settlements. The deeper she went, the darker the path. He had been investigated for corruption in 1999, accused of trafficking influence through state-run care systems. No charges stuck. But Ava found a forgotten article buried in archives. Kessler funded private transfers for foster children. One photo showed him shaking hands with a boy who looked eerily like Michael. Her breath hitched. She zoomed in. The scar above the eyebrow. It was him. Her brother. And this man had taken him. But why? Ava stared at the screen, stomach twisting. The scandal was deeper than she'd imagined. This wasn't just about a lost sibling. This was a buried crime. And someone had kept it hidden for decades. The next morning, Ava walked into Lena's cafe, the bell above the door chiming like a warning bell. Lena looked up from behind the counter, her smile faltering. Ava placed a printed photo on the counter. "Why didn't you tell me you knew about him?" Lena paled. "What are you talking about?" Ava leaned in, her voice cold. "You told me to visit the Hart family. You knew they had answers." Lena glanced around the cafe, then lowered her voice. "It wasn't my secret to tell." Ava shook her head. "You lied." Lena's voice trembled. "I was trying to protect you from truths that ruin lives." Ava's eyes stung. "You should have trusted me to decide that." The tension was thick. Customers turned to look. Lena said nothing more. Ava walked out, her body rigid with betrayal and purpose. There would be no more lies. Only truth. No matter how dark. Ava sat at the city library, surrounded by stacks of musty legal archives. Her fingers sifted through decades-old documents, her eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. Each file she opened added to the tangled web. Nathan Kessler had influence in every department, his name threaded through adoption agencies, state grants, even real estate deals near former foster facilities. Ava's stomach churned. It wasn't just one child. It was a system. He'd moved them like pawns, cloaked in legality. A librarian approached. "Looking for someone in particular?" Ava nodded. "Michael Whitman. Foster transfers around 1996. The woman disappeared and returned minutes later with a cardboard file. Inside, Ava found a transfer request signed by Kessler himself, authorizing a private family relocation. Her fingers trembled. "This was never legal," she whispered. Her brother hadn't disappeared. He had been taken under forged authority. Ava's world tilted. She'd been digging for her brother. Now she was standing over something much bigger. Ava met with a retired family court lawyer named Helen Pierce. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe tucked away from the street noise. Helen reviewed the file, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. "This shouldn't exist," she murmured. "These signatures were fabricated. Kessler never had legal custody of any child. He must have used forged documents or bribed someone inside." Ava's voice trembled. "So, he kidnapped my brother." Helen nodded grimly. "And likely others. These records suggest repeat offenses." Ava's hands balled into fists. "Why wasn't he stopped?" Helen sighed. "Money, power, silence, and threats. Many of us knew something was wrong, but we were told to stay out of it, or else." Ava stared at the page. "Then it's time someone didn't stay out." Helen met her gaze and nodded. "You need evidence. Solid, documented, recorded." Ava left the cafe with a new mission, not just to find Michael, but to uncover the entire rotten framework. In the quiet of her apartment, Ava pulled up an old newspaper archive using Helen's court pass. She filtered articles using Kessler's name and Foster keywords. Then, a headline from 1998 caught her breath. "Community Center purchased by private donor." The donor, Nathan Kessler. The same building now housed a political lobbying firm. Ava clicked deeper. Buried in the article was a photo. Standing in the corner, behind Kessler, was the same boy from before, older now, maybe 10. Her eyes scanned his face. That scar again. "Michael," she whispered. She saved the image and printed it. A lead. Proof. Now. She marked the location. The center might hold records. She had to go there. Right now. Her brother had been hidden in plain sight, part of a system of manipulation. But Ava wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away, replaced by purpose. She gathered her things, loaded her bag, and stepped into the night with resolve sharp as steel. Ava stood in front of the old community center the next morning. Its windows were tinted, its doors locked behind security glass. She buzzed in. A receptionist greeted her with rehearsed politeness. "Do you have an appointment?" Ava shook her head. "I'm researching property history. I'd like to see archives." The woman frowned. "That's not public information." Ava reached into her bag and pulled out a journalist ID she'd borrowed from a friend. The receptionist hesitated, then called upstairs. Minutes later, a man in a suit appeared. "You're not with the Herald," he said bluntly. Ava stood tall. "You're right, but I'm investigating Kessler." His expression changed instantly. "You need to leave. Not without answers," Ava snapped. He stepped forward. "Then, expect consequences." Ava met his eyes without flinching. "So be it." She turned and walked out, her pulse wild but steady. The system was still protecting him. But that only meant one thing: she was getting close. That night, Ava returned home and sat in darkness, the city lights outside flickering like signals. She listened to an old voicemail from her mother, one she hadn't played in years. "Take care of each other," the voice said. "No matter what happens." Ava wept softly. She felt Michael's presence everywhere now, in her memories, her dreams, her fire. She remembered him shielding her as a child, holding her when she was scared. He hadn't abandoned her. He was stolen. She whispered into the silence, "I'm coming for you, Michael." Then she stood, walked to the wall, and pinned up every photo, document, and article she had. A full investigation board emerged, strings, markers, timelines. Her hands moved with purpose. No more running in circles. She would expose the truth. All of it. And she would bring him home. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about love. And she would fight until nothing was left to hide. Ava stood outside Lena's apartment, fists clenched, heart racing. She rang the bell once. Then again. No. When Lena finally opened the door, the silence between them was louder than anything Ava had ever heard. "You lied to me," Ava said, stepping inside without waiting. Lena closed the door softly behind her. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything." Ava turned sharply. "That's the same thing." Lena sat on the couch, exhausted. "I knew about Kessler. My uncle worked with him." Ava's breath caught. "What?" Lena nodded slowly. "He was a handler, paperwork, transfers, whatever Kessler needed." Ava's face drained of color. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because he threatened my family," Lena said, voice shaking. "He made children disappear. I was scared." Ava knelt in front of her. "But Michael, he's my brother," Lena whispered, "and he's alive." Ava's eyes flooded. "How do you know?" Lena whispered, "Because I saw him last year. He came looking for you." Lena stood and walked to a cluttered desk drawer. She opened it, pulling out a worn envelope. Inside was a photo, grainy but clear. A man in his 40s, weary-eyed, standing outside a shelter. "This is Michael," Lena said. "He gave me this to give to you." Ava took the photo in trembling hands. "He's alive," she whispered. Her knees buckled as she sat on the floor, staring at her brother's adult face for the first time in decades. "Why didn't he come to me himself?" "He didn't want to endanger you," Lena replied. "He said, if you dug too deep, people would get hurt." Ava shook her head slowly. "But people already were." Lena knelt beside her. "He left an address on the back, but it's old. He said not to follow him." Ava stared at the photo, her voice steady. "I have to." Lena didn't stop her. She just said, "Then promise you'll be careful." Ava stood. "I can't promise that anymore." That night, Ava lay in bed, the photo on her nightstand. Memories swirled. Michael holding her hand during storms, singing off-key lullabies when she cried, whispering promises under threadbare blankets. She hadn't realized how much of her heart had stayed in that childhood. The child in her had waited all these years for his return. The woman she'd become was now ready to find him. She sat up and reached under her bed for the old family box again. Inside were drawings, school awards, and the last photo of them together, before the system swallowed them whole. Ava placed it beside the new photo. Time had changed them, but something in his eyes had not. The protector. The brother. The truth was no longer abstract. It had a face, a history, a heartbeat. And Ava knew what she had to do next. Tomorrow, she would follow that lead, no matter where it took her. Even into the shadows of the past. At dawn, Ava stood on the edge of a weathered industrial neighborhood. The address on the photo led to a community shelter tucked between rusted warehouses and broken fences. She hesitated before entering. Inside, volunteers sorted donations and meals. She showed the photo to a staff member, who glanced at it and nodded. He used to stay here. Quiet guy. Helped out a lot. Called himself Mike. Ava's breath caught. Is he still here? The volunteers shook their head. Haven't seen him in months. Said he was going north. Did he leave a number? No. Just this. The volunteer handed her a dog-eared envelope with Ava's name written in neat block letters. Ava opened it slowly. Inside was a note. I knew you'd find me. But not yet. Not until it's safe. I'm still watching, Ava. Be strong. Her hands trembled. He was out there. And he believed in her. That was enough. Back home, Ava placed the note on her wall, connecting it with a red string to Kessler's name. Her board was nearly full now. Maps, faces, dates, threads like a spider's web. But one face was still missing. Kessler's recent photo. She needed to see him, to look him in the eyes, and ask what he'd done. She researched his upcoming public appearances. One stood out, a charity gala scheduled for the following week. Public, flashy, and media covered. Perfect. Ava circled the date. She would be there. Not to accuse. Not yet. But to confirm. She needed to look into his eyes and know for certain. She needed to feel what her brother might have felt. Not vengeance, understanding. Her mission was no longer just about reunion. It was about confrontation. And truth. Ava whispered to herself, I'm coming, Michael. Just hold on. The night of the gala arrived. Ava stepped out of the cab in front of a glittering hotel, her heart pounding. Cameras flashed as officials and donors passed by. She walked with confidence, her dark dress sleek, eyes scanning every face. Inside, chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light. Wealth whispered through every corner. Then, she saw him. Nathan Kessler. Older than his photos, still imposing, shaking hands at the far end of the room. Ava's breath caught. She had imagined this moment so many times, but nothing prepared her for the weight of it. She took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and slowly made her way through the crowd. Her pulse roared in her ears. As she approached, Kessler turned slightly, and his eyes met hers. For a split second, something flickered, recognition or paranoia. Ava kept walking, brushing past without a word. She wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. But now, he knew she was real. Ava slipped out of the ballroom and into a corridor lined with framed photographs. She needed air, but more than that, she needed certainty. She ducked into a quiet lounge, pulled out her phone, and hit record. Then she texted a number Lena had given her. He's here, I'm ready. Minutes later, the door creaked open. The man from the street, the one she had helped, entered. He was thinner now, wary. But his eyes, they were the same. Her heart surged. Michael, she whispered. He nodded, a soft smile on his weathered face. Took you long enough. Tears filled Ava's eyes. You disappeared. I had to, he said. They were watching. I couldn't risk you. But I found you anyway, she said. He chuckled softly. I knew you would. They sat in silence for a long moment, lost in the years between them. Then Ava said, It's time we finish this. Michael's jaw tensed. Then let's do it together. Michael slid a USB drive across the table. Everything I've gathered, documents, names, accounts, proof Kessler's system still exists. Ava picked it up carefully. Why didn't you go public? Because they still have reach, Michael replied. I tried once. My contact vanished. The message was clear. Ava's face hardened. But now you're not alone. Michael nodded. We'll need the press, someone with reach, and someone who won't fold. Ava thought of Helen, the retired lawyer, and a journalist friend she hadn't called in years. I have people. Michael leaned back. Then we move fast. Once they know we're active, they'll try to bury us. Ava looked at the drive again, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This ends now. Michael whispered. It has to. Too many were lost. In that quiet room, surrounded by velvet and lies, they became a team again. Broken once, but never again. Ava stood in the hotel lobby, her coat draped over one arm, the USB secured inside her bag. Michael stood by the exit. You sure about this? He asked. I've never been more sure, she replied. As they exited into the crisp night, a black SUV across the street suddenly roared to life. Ava's instincts screamed. Run! She shouted. They sprinted through the alley behind the hotel, heartbeats thundering. Tires squealed. Michael shouted, They're on us! They ducked into a stairwell of a nearby parking garage, breathing hard. How did they know? Ava asked. They always know, Michael replied. That's why we go quiet now. Send the files anonymously. Leak everything. Ava nodded, shaken but undeterred. Let them come. We'll be ready. Sirens sounded in the distance. She tightened her grip on the bag. Let's burn their empire down. Michael smiled grimly. Now you sound like me. The war had begun. Hours later, back at her apartment, Ava sat at her computer, uploading the files to multiple journalists, cloud drives, and encrypted news outlets. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. No more waiting. No more fear. Michael stood behind her, silent, watching her light the match. They'll retaliate, he said. Ava didn't look away from the screen. Let them. I've already lost everything once. I'm not afraid to lose more if it means truth sees daylight. A final click sent the last file. A confirmation tone rang. It's done, she said. They stared at the screen as the story began its spread. Headlines would follow. Investigations. Spotlights. Exposure. The system was about to crack. Ava leaned back, exhausted. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. You did it. She replied, We did. Outside, the city remained quiet. For now. But the storm they'd summoned had already begun to rise. The news broke before sunrise. Ava's phone buzzed non-stop. Journalists, whistleblowers, citizens, all echoing the same word. Exposure. The story spread like fire. Headlines screamed, Corruption in foster system, Nathan Kessler named in scandal. Ava watched it unfold on her screen, Michael beside her. He looked hollow, as if part of him had waited for this justice too long to celebrate. They believe us, Ava said softly. Michael gave a single nod. It's just beginning. Her email pinged. Major outlets requesting interviews, legal advocates offering protection, former victims reaching out. Ava sat back, overwhelmed. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone Kessler had silenced. Michael whispered, We pulled the first thread. Now the whole thing unravels. Outside, the sun crept over the rooftops, casting a golden light through the blinds. Ava exhaled slowly. For the first time, she felt power, not control over others, but over her own story. By noon, protests had formed outside Kessler's corporate offices. Journalists swarmed the gates. He released a bland denial, calling the claims fabricated. But the evidence was too detailed, too widespread. Government agencies launched immediate investigations. Old files reopened. Kessler's allies distanced themselves quickly. Ava and Michael watched it all from Helen Pierce's small office. Helen sipped her coffee, nodding at the TV. "He's cornered," Ava replied, "and we haven't even spoken yet." Helen handed Ava a folder. "A subpoena's coming. They'll want your statement. You ready?" Ava nodded slowly. "Yes, I want to speak for the ones who can't." Michael added, "We still don't know how many he hurt." Helen said, "But you forced them to look." Outside the office window, crowds moved like a rising tide. Ava stood at the glass. The city below changed forever. "Now we hold them accountable," she said. The reckoning had begun. That evening, Ava and Michael returned to the same shelter where he had once stayed in hiding. The staff welcomed them warmly. One volunteer handed Michael a small box. "He left this with us, said someone would come for it." Inside were keepsakes, an old journal, a photo of them as kids, and a worn cassette tape. Michael's hands trembled. Ava asked, "What is it?" He held up the tape. "My last message. I used to record myself talking to you. I didn't know if you'd ever hear it." Ava placed her hand over his. "I'm here now." They sat together on a bench behind the shelter, the city noise fading as the sun dipped low. Michael whispered, "I lost hope more times than I can count." Ava replied, "But you still waited." He nodded. "Because I knew you'd never stop looking." In that quiet space, their fractured past began to knit itself back together. The next morning, Ava and Michael visited the place they had once called home. A dilapidated duplex long since abandoned. The windows were boarded up, graffiti scrawled across the siding, yet it stood stubborn against time. "This was the window we used to sneak out of," Michael said, pointing. Ava smiled faintly. "You used to boost me up so I could grab the branch." They walked through the overgrown yard, their footsteps quiet. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust. Ava found the corner where her bed used to be. "It felt bigger," she said. Michael replied, "We were smaller." He bent and picked up a broken toy soldier half buried under debris. "I remember this." Ava whispered, "We made it out." Michael looked around one last time. "But we'll make sure no one gets trapped in here again." They stepped outside together, closing the door behind them, not with fear, but finality. Later that day, they held a small press briefing. Ava stood at a podium in a modest hall filled with reporters, community advocates and survivors. Michael stood behind her, silent support. Ava took a breath. "My name is Ava Whitman. I was separated from my brother when I was 6. For years I believed he was lost. But he wasn't. He was stolen. And the man responsible, Nathan Kessler, used his power to silence us all. Not anymore." Flashbulbs went off. Voices whispered. She continued, "This isn't just our story. This is the story of every child failed by a system built to protect them. We demand justice, not only for ourselves, but for every name buried in the files they tried to burn." She stepped back. Michael placed his hand on her shoulder. The room stood in a rare silence, the weight of truth settling. Ava knew now, they couldn't erase what had already been seen. Ava walked through the city park at sunrise, her coat drawn close, steam rising from her coffee cup. The chaos had calmed. No cameras. No headlines. Just birdsong and breeze. Her boots crunched across a gravel path she used to walk with her foster mother. She paused by the old fountain, watching the water ripple in golden light. She felt the weight lift, not entirely, but enough to breathe. Behind her, children chased pigeons. A couple laughed softly. Life, undisturbed. She sat on a bench, fingers wrapped around the warm paper cup, eyes closed. For years, she carried questions like armor. Now the truth was out. The guilt, the anger, the longing, they hadn't vanished, but they had loosened their grip. She smiled faintly. "We made it, Michael," she whispered. In the distance, a dog barked, and the sky blushed with color. She didn't need applause or revenge. She had peace. And that was enough. Later that morning, Ava visited her classroom. It had been weeks since she last stood before the whiteboard. The desks were still slightly crooked, drawings still taped to the back wall. Her students greeted her with bright eyes and eager questions. One little girl asked, "Did you stop the bad guy?" Ava knelt, smiling gently. "We made sure people are listening now." She led the morning circle, her voice steady, stronger. These children were why she fought, so they would never feel lost the way she had. During recess, she watched them from the window, their laughter rising like music. Michael's message echoed in her mind, "We protect those who come after." She picked up a marker and began planning tomorrow's lesson. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about ensuring no one else repeated it. Her life had been fractured, but she could give others something whole. That afternoon, Ava and Michael stood beneath a large tree in a quiet cemetery. They had no grave for their parents, no headstone for their past, but they had chosen a place to honor it. Michael held a small spade. Ava knelt and placed a photo, weathered, folded, into the earth. It showed the two of them as children, holding hands beneath the same tree. Michael whispered, "This is where they'd want us to begin again." They planted a young oak beside the photo, the soil damp with morning rain. No words were needed. This was closure, messy, imperfect, and real. As they packed up the tools, Ava looked at the sapling swaying gently in the wind. "It'll outlive us," she said. "That's the point," Michael replied. They left in silence, their footsteps soft against the grass. The tree stood behind them, roots already gripping the past and leaves reaching for the light. That evening, Ava sat at her desk, pen in hand, writing a letter to her younger self. She wrote slowly, deliberately, "You were never weak. They just told you that so you'd stop asking questions." She paused, tears threatening. "You were brave, even when you were alone. And you were right to remember him. Never let anyone convince you that your pain was your fault." Her handwriting steadied. "You found your brother, you found your voice, and one day you'll help others find theirs too." She folded the letter and tucked it into the back of her journal. It wasn't for sending. It was for keeping, for remembering who she'd been, and how far she'd come. She exhaled, closed the journal, and looked out the window. The stars were visible now, faint but constant. Like memories. Like hope. Like the truth, once buried, now shining clear. The next morning, Ava walked alone down the city street. No rush, no disguise. Life moved around her, cars honking, conversations drifting from cafes. She passed the crosswalk where it had all begun. The street looked the same, but she didn't. She paused at the curb, smiling to herself. She had helped a man across the street and ended up walking into her own past. She looked ahead, not toward what was lost, but what she had reclaimed. The traffic light turned green. She stepped forward. Behind her, the city carried on. Ahead there was no map. Just sky. Just road. And for the first time in her life, Ava didn't need directions. She was no longer searching. She was moving forward, free of the silence, full of the truth. And with every step, she walked closer to the future she had earned.